All right, welcome to Park Pride's Roundtable, Outdoors Inclusive, a Vision of Nature for All. We are going to get started. Now it is 12:05. All right, and I'd like to say welcome to everyone and thank you to the almost 300 people who have signed up for today's roundtable. My name is Ariane DeLong and I'm the Director of Development at Park Pride. Michael Halicki, our Executive Director, is away getting some much needed R&R at a remote cabin in the mountains with limited internet, so he is actually joining us in the audience today instead of presenting as he usually does. For those of you who are not familiar with Park Pride, we are a 30-year-old organization with a mission to engage communities to activate the power of parks. We take a three-pronged approach to our work by offering programs to help community members come together and create neighborhood parks that reflect their unique needs. We also serve as the voice for parks, advocating for change at a system-wide level and providing tools and support for community groups advocating for their neighborhood parks. And through educational programs like this one today, we bring together community members, government officials, park professionals, and park advocates together to expand the tent of park and nature advocates here in Atlanta. Before we get started, I want to share some information about today's roundtable. We'll be hearing short presentations from each of our panelists, followed by a Q&A from our moderator in the audience. And thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. You can also submit questions during the program at any time using the chat feature. However, due to the high volume of questions, we will not be able to answer every question submitted, but we'll do our best. Also want to let you know today's session is being recorded and will be shared following the program through email. We'll also be sending around a short survey after the program and would love to hear your feedback. Before we dive into the program, I also want to take a moment to recognize Park Pride's corporate champions. These are companies that believe in the power of parks and nature and that make our work possible. To all of our sponsors, thank you. I know that many of you are watching today, and now more than ever, we couldn't do it without your support. I'd also like to invite you to get more involved in your local parks by attending a Park Pride virtual park meeting, where you can come and connect with our community building staff, fellow neighborhood park advocates, meet city and parks and rec officials, and learn best practices for improving your park. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, July 8th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And now I'd like to turn to today's discussion. As Atlanta adjusts to the reality of COVID-19, the importance of access to nature has never been more important. With the city still largely shut down, it's no surprise that more and more people are turning to neighborhood parks to engage with nature and relieve stress. Not all Atlantans have been reaping the health benefits of nature during this difficult time. Many communities, and particularly communities of color, do not have access to nature near their homes. The global health pandemic and corresponding shutdown have highlighted disparities in access to nature and amplified the need for urgent action. Park Pride and our partner nonprofits are moving forward with several initiatives designed to form meaningful connections between people from all walks of life with nature. On behalf of Park Pride, the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, and West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, thank you for joining us today. We will be sharing some of the innovative ways groups are using parks to drive positive health, economic, and social outcomes, and how advancing a vision of nature for all has the potential to revolutionize environmental advocacy in Atlanta. With that, I'd like to introduce Adriana Garcia, Park Pride's nature accessibility advocate and the moderator of today's session. Adriana joined Park Pride this past year and has really hit the ground running, adding a layer of depth to our work and bringing many new voices to the table. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be here today. Like Ariane said, I'm Adriana Garcia. I'm the nature accessibility advocate at Park Pride and the moderator for today's event. I'm currently working on an initiative called Nature for All Atlanta. But before I jump into sharing about that initiative, I wanted to give you some context into what we are discussing today. During the past few months, we have been reminded that systemic racism and oppression is very real, With the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery, and many more, the deep-rooted issues of inequality and inequity in this country have come into the forefront for everyone. We're seeing it affect all areas of life, including time spent in nature. Outdoor spaces are supposed to be spaces to relax and unwind, spend time with loved ones, but that's not what we have seen for the Black community. Even recently, we have Christian Cooper, the birder that found himself at the mercy of a racist white woman in Central Park that would threaten to call the police on him for no reason. These recent events and Mr. Cooper's story in particular highlight the urgent need for action to make outdoor spaces more inclusive. We are realizing more and more there are social barriers as well as physical ones preventing our communities from equitably accessing parks and nature. I could talk more about facts and figures, but to start, I want to share a personal story about why this is so important to me. In August 2017, a group of friends and I backpacked 12 miles deep into the Grand Canyon to the Havasupai Native Reservation. We were nearing the end of our trek, and my back was hurting. I couldn't get the images of those turquoise, beautiful waterfalls out of my head. As we rounded a corner and descended into what looked like the beginning of the campground, I saw that magnificent waterfall before my eyes. We stopped to stare for a bit, but my eyes quickly drifted to the many people playing and swimming in the pool of water below. There was something different about the people, but I couldn't put my finger on it until finally I turned to my friend next to me and said, "Look at all of these brown people in the water. They look like us." I felt seen, and it was a feeling of empowerment that I've never been able to feel before. I felt that I could be my whole self in that space. The point I want to make by telling the story is that number one, representation matters. And number two, having access to nature is not enough. What we really need is access to nature that is diverse, inclusive, and welcoming to all. That leads me into the work that I am doing with Park Pride and the Nature for All Atlanta initiative. It's an initiative put forth by Park Pride, West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, and Trees Atlanta with the support of the Turner Foundation. The mission for this initiative is to advance the vision of an Atlanta with a protected tree canopy and residents with equitable access to an interconnected networks of parks, green spaces, urban forests, and trails. Why does this initiative deserve your attention? Well, first of all, nature is good for people's health. Time spent in nature at a park or on a trail is proven to improve health and well-being. Secondly, because everyone deserves access to nature, the health and societal benefits of access to nature must be shared equitably across Atlanta's diverse communities. I want to give a short example of a park in Atlanta that I believe has the right idea. Over on the west side, in a culturally diverse neighborhood, there is a small park called Sarah J. Gonzalez Memorial Park that debuted back in October 2018. Surprisingly, it's the first park in Georgia to be named after a Latinx person. The park's 6 core design features deliver on the values of diversity, community, unity, and family. This park is ADA compliant and it's wheelchair accessible throughout. It has a playground for children of all abilities. It has a children's soccer field. It has the first learning nook, a custom-built education area in Atlanta Park. It has a legacy plaza to reflect themes of inclusiveness and cultural diversity. And the Officer Edgar Flores Memorial Community Garden, which houses the city's only Latin ethnobotanical community garden. If you want to learn more about that park, you're welcome to go to the sarahjgonzalez.org. Lastly, nature in Atlanta is at risk and must be protected and enhanced. The city of Atlanta put forth a stated goal of obtaining 50% tree canopy coverage. Trees and vegetation clean the air. Trees are the lungs of our city. Currently, the city is losing trees faster than they are being replaced. We're achieving this through education, engagement, empowerment, and advocacy. Lastly, what I want to share with you is I just want to reiterate how important it is to make these spaces inclusive and welcoming to all people. We all recreate differently, and we come to these spaces having different experiences in the outdoors. After that experience I had in Havasupai, I made it my personal mission to connect people of color and underrepresented groups to the outdoors, because I honestly believe that nature is for all. Thank you. And I'm actually going to go ahead, being that I'm the moderator as well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. And those panelists are, we'll start with Darryl Haddock. He is the Education Director at the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. Next, we have Daisy Mugford. She's a Thrive Outside Fellow at the Trust for Public Land. And lastly, we have Ayanna Williams, the Healthy Cities Director at the Nature Conservancy. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to Darryl Haddock.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is our new normal, and it'd be great to see you. But I'm going to share a little bit about what Wawa has done and is doing to move forward our vision for how we can have healthy and accessible parks. One of the things that, there they go. One of the things that Wawa is known for is the fact that we've adopted the 3 creeks that flow through West Atlanta. All of our creeks in particular flow into the Chattahoochee River, and we're part of the Chattahoochee watershed. But our creeks, interestingly enough, the headwaters of those creeks start in and around downtown Atlanta. And so basically all of the raindrops that fall on the west side of the city eventually go into the Chattahoochee essentially and down to the Gulf of Mexico, while all the raindrops that fall on the east side of the city all go to the Atlantic Ocean. And because we are the primary drinking water source from the Chattahoochee for much of Metro Atlanta, it's really imperative that we address and deal with not just the water quality, but the state of our watersheds, because the watersheds are the land that's around these bodies of water. And so a lot of times the water is flowing across the land in terms of stormwater, and those pollutants, the trash, the debris eventually find themselves in our aquatic ecosystems. So if you look at this slide, it shows you the state of many of our green spaces on the west side. We are uniquely situated, however, especially in the Utah Creek watershed, one of our 3 adopted watersheds, to be very park rich. We have a lot of green space, and much of it is in fairly good condition. We have the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve, the Outdoor Activity Center, the Lionel Hampton Beecher Hills, and a lot of green spaces that a lot of people are currently using, many of which are predominantly African Americans that live on the west side of town. However, we do have some under and poorly maintained parks and green spaces on the west side. And so what Wawa attempts to do is to organize and educate around the importance of sustaining these west side parks, increasing access for people of color, and using them as living laboratories, which, through which we could build on our educational programs that allow us to focus on things like STEM. We like to call our education programs multi-generational, or K to Gray. And we're hoping that we're impacting everyone in our community by providing them with the tools they need to speak in their own voices, raising the issues that they may have with respect to access to green space. The picture before you here is the Outdoor Activity Center. That is our primary kind of spot. We've got a beautiful building. It's 26 acres, and we have a very, very healthy urban forest. And as you can see, we're able to program not just conservation and experiential education, but we really want to focus on training the younger generation to get out and experience nature in ways that are culturally relevant for them. We want these youth that live in our community to see themselves as scientists. which sometimes is a little challenging. I love Bill Nye, and I think that, while Bill Nye is, he's on, I don't look like him, maybe with the glasses, but I don't wear a white lab coat. And many of Wawa staff are scientists, academics, and community leaders that have made it a commitment to use our parks, as I say, as kind of a living laboratory, a focal point, so that we can talk about all of the myriad issues, whether it be civil rights or environmental or poor access to food. All of these things we feel is holistic in terms of everything emerges from the watershed. We all live in a watershed. The watershed sustains us, but the watershed is also impacted by us. And lastly, I want to show some of the slides that show some of the activities that we've done. So we do a lot of park maintenance. We love our parks department. We think that our parks department does an excellent job, but our parks department needs a lot of help. And as I mentioned, a lot of times our parks are oftentimes under-maintained for a lot of reasons that we can get into. But as Adriana lifted up, a lot of that, quite frankly, is the structural framing that creates disparities in communities of color. So while we're very park rich, equity in terms of the resources don't always come back to those parks, and they need to be maintained. And oftentimes we're able to maintain them with community members. And we've done a lot to create workforce development opportunities with organizations like Habesha, Greening Youth, the Greening Youth Foundation, Groundworks Atlanta, and others that have been able to bring youth that live in the community and give them stipends and other wages so that they're able to focus on the work that's right in their backyard. So I guess I will pass it on to Daisy, and she can share with you some of the work she's doing in the Trust for Public Land.
Yeah, Darryl, before we move on to Daisy, we had someone ask what WAWA stands for.
So we affectionately, jokingly say that WAWA is baby talk for water, but WAWA actually stands for the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. So that's our acronym. We also have an Ndinkra symbol where WAWA is a West African symbol that means resilient or strong. And so we use that also as one of our key cultural foundations. But WAWA as a term means the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance.
Great. Thank you so much for explaining that, Darryl. We're going to move on to Daisy Mugford.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Daisy Mugford, as Adriana mentioned. I am a fellow at the Trust for Public Land Atlanta office by way of the Greening Youth Foundation, and I work as the program coordinator for the Thrive Outside initiative. I've been working in the outdoor industry since a sophomore in college. So when starting, I had no idea how impactful the outdoors were to me and my identity as a Black woman. However, I realized there's a direct connection from land to people. Whenever I go to a new outdoor space, I really like to understand the history of the land that I'm embarking upon. It makes me feel good to know that I have a direct and/or significant connection to the land. Even while social distancing, I can still enjoy different landmarks in Georgia when I visit them. The more I learn about the landmark, the more I encourage my friends and families to go outside of their comfort zone and do outside adventures. It's one of the main reasons why I enjoy my fellowship as a Thrive Outside coordinator. I get to expose children who look like me to the various wonders of nature programs and show them that outdoor activities are not foreign things to Black people. And working with the Trust for Public Land helps me spread that message. So here you'll see the infographic for the Trust for Public Land and its overall goals now and for the near future. TPL has always been committed to creating parks and protecting land for people so that they may have healthy and livable communities. This is especially prevalent in Atlanta with projects like Cook Park and Schoolyards, where TPL is working with Park Pride, where TPL provides playgrounds and parks for children in low socioeconomic communities. The mission of the Trust for Public Land is to create parks and preserve land for people, ensuring healthy, livable communities for generations to come. The unique connection between land and people has been at the heart of our work for more than 45 years, which is why communities are at the center of our work. We're a national organization with 30 field offices, including the Georgia, Alabama office located in Atlanta. Our efforts have put into public ownership nearly 5,000 places and 3 million acres of land. The Trust for Public Land has created nearly 500 parks, playgrounds, and gardens and developed more than 2,000 miles of trails. We have put a quality park within walking distance of more than 9 million people. In the most recent update to our strategic plan, described on this slide here, the 3 pillars of equity, public health, and climate change undergird all of our work. The Trust for Public Land believes that everybody should live within a 10-minute walk of a park or trail, emphasizing that health, social, and environmental benefits of parks and green spaces should be accessible to all people. In Georgia, we have completed more than 200 projects across the state. We are proud of our work with helping to create the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park, create and launch the park vision for the Atlanta Beltline, and preserve 18,000 acres and 80 miles of riverfront along the Chattahoochee. Later this year, we will open Cook Park with our partner, the City of Atlanta. And here you guys will see my program, Thrive Outside. So as I noted earlier, I came to the Trust for Public Land to coordinate its Thrive Outside program. The program, funded in large by the Outdoor Foundation, aims to introduce Atlanta children to the outdoors. Specifically, we want to introduce them to the Chattahoochee River and their neighborhood parks to support the 10-minute walk campaign of TPL. To accomplish this work, we have partnered with a network of like-minded organizations, the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, WAWA, Chattahoochee Nature Center, Chattahoochee Riverkeeper, Southeast Beascape, Greening Youth Foundation, and Atlanta Audubon, as well as the YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Atlanta. My role is to provide the funding and logistical support to increase the capacity of each organization to pursue its mission and collaboration of the entire network. For example, over the summer, our network collaborated to take hundreds of kids to the Chattahoochee Nature Center in Lake Lanier. As a part of this effort, we work with the YMCA to provide scholarships that allow children experiencing homelessness to attend a week-long nature camp, where every child visited the Chattahoochee Nature Center to learn about the river, and some were given the opportunity to canoe on the water. We, in total, and work with the YMCA, provided scholarships for about 150 children who are experiencing homelessness. Getting these kids outside was so important given the challenges that they are experiencing. And also during the school year, our program providers came to the YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs twice a week to engage them in nature and outdoor activities. We originally had 13 weeks planned, but due to COVID, we stopped in week 8. As of currently, we are working through the challenges presented by the pandemic, and I've been inspired by the creativity and energy of my partners to keep going and enhance Thrive Outside's network. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much, Daisy. We're going to move right on to Ayanna Williams.
Good afternoon. I am Ayanna Williams, the Healthy Cities Director with the Nature Conservancy. And I've actually been a community organizer for over 20 years, and I've been working in Atlanta in environmental nonprofits for about 13 years. I want to share with you both the project that I'm working on with the Nature Conservancy, but also more of my overall philosophy for how I approach working with diverse communities around parks and green spaces. My work has always focused on listening. And if you know me, and I know some of you do know me, I will listen to anybody. I like to talk to people in the park who are using the park. I want to talk to people who live near the park, people who maintain the park, the elected officials. I talk to anybody that'll talk to me, I'm going to talk. And actually more of talking, I really like to listen. And what I'm listening for is I want to hear, what do people want to see in their park? What do they think is missing? What do they enjoy in their park? What are they looking for and excited about? I want to hear, what are they afraid of? What are they, nervous about happening with a park or a green space? And the reason that I'm listening is not so much to respond, but it's because I want to work together to find strength-based solutions for these problems. And I know that people have different experiences with green spaces and different orientations towards them. So I don't assume that what I think about the green space is going to be what the people who live near or play or use a green space might be thinking. Also, a big part of my work is building pathways for meaningful engagement. And I do that now with our South River Forest work. And I also do that in the past work. I think that I wanted to show on this slide, that's me doing a tour. And the reason that I'm showing that on one side and then on the other side, you should be able to see a bird, which we saw at Constitution Lakes Park. Because the work that I do, it's about people, but with the Nature Conservancy, it's also about nature. It's a science-based organization that works both in the urban conservation work in Atlanta, but also across the state. And the work that we're doing is that link between people and nature is just such an intrinsic connection. And it's so important for all people to have the opportunity, especially in times like this, when there is a global pandemic and there is so much stress on people's lives. Having the opportunity, the picture, the bird, it's actually at Constitution Lakes Park, which is inside of 285. You get in that park, you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. Well, you might hear some cars, but it kind of feels like you're in the middle of nowhere if you get to the right spot. Also in this picture is Rudolph Durant Jr. He works with my team, and you may see him out at community meetings. He is the person who works directly with our Urban Green Jobs program, which Darryl mentioned, our partnership with Habesha, with the Outdoor Activity Center, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I want to share with you our vision for the South River Forest, and I have to say this is not a vision that I came up with. People have been talking about the South River Forest for a long time. The work that I'm focused on is on the east side. Both Daisy and Darryl are focused on the west side, but I'm looking at the South River, much less known than the Chattahoochee. You don't drink from the South River. I wouldn't recommend it. The South River actually empties out into the Atlantic because of, well, I only get like 7 minutes, so I can't tell you everything today. But the South River is on the east side. The Moreland Avenue kind of divides one side of the park from the other. We're both in City of Atlanta and DeKalb County, which makes it a multi-jurisdictional park. And I don't know if you can see this map, if it's as small on your screen as it is on my screen, you probably can't see much. But you see the lovely lady in the top corner, that is Mrs. Nichols. And she has lived in this community as a homeowner on the Atlanta portion. I really want to like point and touch things, but that won't do any good because you can't see that. But Mrs. Nichols has lived for more than 45 years as a homeowner near Southside Park, near the Lake Charlotte property that recently came online with the City of Atlanta. And she put me in her car and drove me around the neighborhood for longer than my boss probably should know. And she shared these stories with me about the appreciation they have for living in a forest, for those trees that really help living that close to 285. She remembers when it was built. But the trees are really seen as such a great thing to have in a community, and they really value those trees that are in their neighborhood. She talked about opportunities where they would go and connect with the watershed treatment plant that's in their neighborhood, take children there, learn about testing the water, learn about the treatment facilities, and do environmental education. And this was before the Olympics came to Atlanta. So they've been doing this and valuing this work and thinking about these things for a long time. So it's important when you go into communities that you listen and that you don't assume that you're introducing people to this concept or to this idea. You often are going to find that people already know about the river and value the green space. I want to touch on our Urban Green Jobs program. And it is a partnership with Habesha, with Wawa, and with many other environmental organizations here in Atlanta. It's a workforce development piece. We provide stipends. We have an audience today, some of our current participants, and we're actively recruiting for our September cohort, which will be starting in just a few months. And so my contact information will be at the end. You can feel free to contact me to learn more about that. I wanted to share the park, the South River Forest. It is the green space. It's kind of shaped a little bit like Texas towards the bottom of the loop. It's just inside of 285. And the thing about it is that the proposed park would be 3,500 acres. It would be larger than Stone Mountain. There is no park of that size that is within the perimeter. This would be an opportunity to really stitch together a number of existing parks like a Constitution Lakes, like a Southside Park, looking at repurposing the landfills that are in that area. These are areas, these are acres and acres of public land that's not publicly accessible, that's fenced in. And so at a time like this, when there's a pandemic and you need to get out and clear your head and social distance, you can't access it if you live in these neighborhoods because it's not publicly accessible. And so what we're looking to do is to work with the communities to create access to this green space and to continue to build this large park vision. Now, I only had a short time to talk to you, and I try to get as much as I can, but I could talk about this all day. So I want to share with you that I will have a virtual opportunity where you can learn more about the South River Forest concept. We're going to have on July 14th, an early morning meeting. If you know me, you know I like the 7:30 a.m. meeting, but they pushed it back to 8:30. It's still in the morning, but not at the crack of dawn. Ryan Gravel will be joining us really to talk about the lessons learned. What are some of the common pitfalls that people fall into when they're building these big, spectacular parks and green spaces in a city? We're talking about the South River Forest being different, being something that we build with community, and it's not something that we put on community. It's not something that we push community out, but that it's built with the community, with the people who live there now, and also the people who have a connection historically to that space. As a lot of communities are changing, you know, there really is this, we don't have forever to build this. We have to do it now, while there still is a community there, and there still are trees there to be saved. So there's really a sense of urgency about this work.
Okay,
I'm going to turn it back over to.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We are going to move on. I love your enthusiasm about the work that you're doing. We have next up our moderated panel discussion, and I'm going to jump right in with a doozy of a question. So it's a three-part question, and I'm going to ask all of you panelists. So we've talked a lot about equitable access to nature today. And so basically, I want to know what that means to you personally, why it's important, and what are the best strategies for creating diverse and inclusive parks and green spaces?
Well, I can keep talking. So I would say that the reason that it is important to me is because I feel like there's, anytime you're building a park, if you need to look at where is it going, what's already there, what's the history, whether it be in a community that already you identify as being diverse, or one that you might discover has more diversity than you're aware of. So I think using this lens in every project is important, whether you think it's going to be a diversity project or not. There's always opportunities for components of equity. And I forgot all the rest of the three questions.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So a lot of times, the traditional way that we design is often putting a concept out there, doing it all kind of in a silo, and then we want to have the community come in and check the box and say we did engagement. And I think what Ayanna detailed and what we were able to do in the Project Creek watershed with all of the new parks that are coming online, like Cook Park and others, is that we really wanted the community to be involved at the beginning. And what we saw, especially in the Project Creek parks, is that communities actually had enough information and enough local knowledge and enough interest in the activities that they wanted to see that they influenced the design. And they actually changed the design in many ways so that they were much better than any concept that we would have been able to create in that silo. And I know that many of us are privileged. We've gone to school, we've been to the ivory tower, and we think we know it all. And oftentimes we use that mantra, if we build it, they will come. And then we wonder why communities don't buy in, And so I think that now this new shift towards equity allows us to align ourselves with the neighborhoods, with the communities. And that means the outcomes will be something where if we really want to see stewardship, then this is the best way to do it.
Thank you, Darryl. Do you have anything to add, Daisy?
I will just piggyback off of what Darryl and Ayanna said. They definitely have a lot more experience than I do, but from my personal perspective, it's just, getting to know the community is if you're going to build a park there in that community, get to know the history of that community, get to know what that community likes. Because you can assume all day what that community may like. And as Darryl said, you can build it and expect people to come. But if they don't feel welcome or they don't know about it or they don't know that they're welcome, then they're not going to come. So get personalized with the community that you want to invite. And that goes for everything. So that's my input on it.
Totally agree. Moving on, Ayanna, you might would say that in Atlanta, people like these nicely manicured parks. My question is, what's your perspective on why it's important to have these types of wooded parks like the South River Forest so close to the city?
I think it's a false narrative to say you have to have either manicured active parks or wooded areas. I think that communities need both. I think that there's definitely a place for both kinds of parks. And when you're talking about a space as large as what we're talking about, 3,500 acres of parkland, concentrated area, there should be something for everybody there. There should be things we've never seen in Atlanta Park, and there should be things that you're used to always seeing in Atlanta Park incorporated in that. And sometimes there's this, the opportunity to go into a space and just be alone with nature when you're in a city with so many people and during a pandemic where you may be sharing space with more people than you're used to. It's just such a wonderful opportunity, and everybody ought to have that and ought to have it close to home.
I agree with that more. Daisy, from your perspective, why is it important for children that grow up in urban environments to have experiences in nature at a young age?
For me, when I did my internships, I had no idea about conservancy or that there was even working with nature besides being a national park ranger. I didn't know that you could, study the landmarks and see how to connect the history of the landmark to the people, or why people do what they do with the landmark, or just different jobs and like scientific jobs in conservancy and working with land. And when you're in urban communities, you're closed off. There's a concrete playground for you. There's no grass. There's not a lot of trees because your trees have been torn down and made into buildings and apartments all around you. So a lot of people become complacent within the space that they're given, and because they're children, they're going to adapt to the situation that they're in. So it's up to us to start them at an early age, to pull them out and to show them that, hey, there's more to the world than your apartment and your school and the mini basketball court that you may have. There's grass out here, there's trees, there's water that you can play in. You can study the plants out here and how they can help you and whatnot. Like, there's so many different varieties and aspects of nature that these children can learn. And if we don't pull them out or offer these experiences to them, for example, Wawa and their outdoor activity center, I feel like that's a wonderful program, especially where it's placed. I stay on the west side of Atlanta, for these children to have nature literally in their backyard and to learn about the cycles of water and how important it is to them. Even with our children who went to the Chattahoochee Nature Center, didn't know this river was right there and accessible to them, and we're afraid of water. We need to get our children to not be afraid of things in nature, because there will come a time where they have to adapt and only use what there is in nature. So I believe that it's a loaded answer, but those are all the reasons why I think it's important to expose it to them early.
Sorry, I was muted. Definitely some great points there, Daisy. I have a final question. I know we don't have a whole lot of time to go through questions, but we have our audience Q&A after this. My final question is, what resources do all of you recommend for anyone interested in learning more about equitable access to nature, and how can people get involved with your organizations?
A quick thought that I have is that I would say you start with equity by considering the storytelling. As Ayanna mentioned, you need to understand the community that this park is situated in. And so it's got a lot of backstory and a lot of history that goes back to, reconstruction in some of these neighborhoods, that it makes sense to understand. And then once you understand that history, that context, then you can move forward with how might you think about addressing putting in new infrastructure or working on the amenities. But a lot of times we just kind of want to go in and consider, this a project. I want to put this garden here. I'm really excited about food, but you've got to make sure that community sees that as their priority. I want to go in and I want to put a playground here. We want to give these people access. But, there might be a lot of issues with respect to why infrastructure worked or didn't work in that community. And I want a pool, or I want this. So I think you have to start out kind of doing that research, finding out where the community is, how it emerged, and then bring them along in the equitable development of the project that you hope you can get. And then be happy with what you decide to get at the end of the process, right? It may look very different from what you started with, but know that that's going to be something that the community is going to fall in love with and take care of.
I would say that a lot of our work is about promoting dialogue. We want to invite people to the table early. We want to listen because there's many ways of knowing. There are people who know where it floods and they know, where the old trees are, and they know things that if you're only coming in or flying in from out of town and, trying to do a workshop or something, you may not know those things. You won't know those things. So really honoring the knowledge that is already there and already in these communities, I think is so important. And don't assume that, that there's only a role at the very beginning, but also make sure that you're engaging people and including people throughout the process. Think about who are you hiring to do the work? Who's maintaining this space? Think about ways that you can connect people to the existing nonprofits in the community that are supporting parks and green space. Does this community know about all the things that Park Pride offers? Does this community know about connecting with the Tool Bank or with Wawa and going to workshops? It's so important to be able to connect with other people who are also working in community and who are also passionate. And so I think that one of the best things you can do is to engage people early and be prepared to engage them throughout the process.
Great, thank you for that, guys. We're actually going to go ahead and move forward to our audience Q&A time. So you will have some opportunity to answer a couple more questions. So we do have a couple questions that have come through. And one particular that I see a lot is that we want to know what the biggest obstacle is for Black communities and for people of color. What are their biggest obstacles when it comes to getting out in nature and having these nature experiences?
Representation, I would say. Definitely representation and exposure. Representation and exposure, I feel like are the biggest obstacles, because they're not going to go out if they don't see people like them going there, because they wouldn't feel welcome. Just like you shared your story, when you went with a few friends and you saw that there were other brown people, like, oh, okay, that might have been a shock to you that you saw, other brown people, because typically there isn't a big representation of African Americans or Latinos or any other people of color in the outdoor industry. So I believe that the most important thing and the barriers is just like exposure and representation, which is why I push for my children with any programs that we have to ensure that, some of our organizations won't have a lot of people of color who work with their staffs. But as long as we have a good bit and they see that, okay, there are Black scientists working in the way, just like I say at Wawa, love Wawa, their staff, they have scientists who are in environmental science. And some kids may be interested in studying, plants and dirt and water, and they just don't know what exactly to do with it. And now that they see that there's someone who there's actually a career out there for you to do outside and study those things, and there's someone that looks just like you, that's an empowerment, and that pushes you to explore and want to know more.
I think the two biggest barriers that I see are the same barrier that anybody, I think, living in the United States at this point has, which is time. Having the time with, working and taking care of family and, doing all the other things that it takes to create a life, having the time to get out into the outdoors, I think is definitely a barrier for Black people, just as it is for other people. I think that the other barrier that I see is the barrier of really feeling like you're welcome, feeling like you're going to see other people who look like you, and that there's going to be activities there that are at your level or appropriate. I know you can only see me from the shoulders up, but I'm not very tall and I'm pretty wide. And so if you're going to be going canoeing down the Chattahoochee, I'm not going. because I'm not going to paddle for 2 hours in the sun in June. That's not going to be good. And so having activities that are accessible to people of different abilities and different ages, I think can really be important. Something that's going to really be, the family can come to it. People who don't have a high fitness level can enjoy it. I think that that can be really important.
I quickly want to add, I think a barrier that we're seeing play out naturally is this recognition that things that are supposed to be for everyone, like municipal infrastructure, is oftentimes weaponized for people of color. And so the reality is that municipal governments like to give you a park and then take your park away when they feel like they want to do that. And they did that with drug enforcement. They did that with gang enforcement. You know, these communities had parks. And then when things changed and economics changed or whatever, you know, the self-same municipal government came in and they put crackdowns and they took the basketball nets down and they cemented up the pools. And those kind of behaviors, again, the racist structures that we experience as communities of color, it has a blowback. And at some point, you're going to say, you know what? Well, I don't want a park, right? I don't want this. I don't want a disc golf course. That's not for me, you know. And then when you see that stuff start to come in, you feel a certain kind of way about it, you know. And so people say, well, why wouldn't they want this? This is so nice. Why don't they want trails? Why don't they want bike lanes? Because when stuff gets in our community that's supposed to be benefiting us, people flip it on us and they punish us with it. And nobody likes to have a gift turned on you and punish you with that very same gift. And until I'm not trying to go there, but until we have justice for all, until we're treated humanely and everybody gets the benefits, everybody gets access, everybody gets privilege, and the privilege is maintained and it's sustainable, I think we will continue to have the national conversation that we're having over and over and over again, and it'll include parks.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for that, all of you. We have another question, and I know that all of you have probably heard the term green gentrification. You know, we've had the Beltline as an example of that. How can we avoid, or I guess, what are some strategies to deal with the green gentrification that's happening?
I don't think that anybody has done it successfully. Nobody has escaped it yet. And there's theories around it. There's some great ideas out there to address it. I think the only way to do it is by involving the community that is there now. Build it for the people who are there now, as opposed to, like Darryl was saying, building stuff for people that you figure are going to come. Build it for who lives there now and who's historically been in that space. And that doesn't mean that you don't build something that's quality, but it means that you include the people who live there now and you get their input in terms of what do they want to see? Do they want to see a pond like at the Fourth Ward, or do they not want to see a pond because they feel like that's going to be a poopy pond of, you know, stormwater like they see running down the streets when it floods, and they don't see that as an amenity. They would rather see it in a cistern underground with a soccer field or a baseball field or something on top of it. And so those are things that culturally there's a different perspective about it. But if you don't have that conversation early on and you put that pond in with the fountains and everything, and you think you're doing something, and the people didn't want it and aren't interested in it and are not impressed. So you have to build for who's there now, not for the people that you think are going to be coming in the future. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, Wawa ran into that, you know, full frontal. You know, we were advocating as scientists for the best practices to manage stormwater. We wanted to see green infrastructure. We had our little banners and we were going into communities, and Ayanna raised a very valid point. People said, we don't want stormwater retention ponds. We don't want, you know, bioswales that are just going to collect trash because we've already got trash on our streets. We want something else, you know. And then immediately when we started discussing the new green infrastructure parks, the market, you know, and we're not going to get into bashing the market, but the market was nimble enough. You know, those in the real estate market jumped ahead of even the green infrastructure project and started to buy up all the property. So you
You
got
have to be able to anticipate that.
exactly.
You can't say now that you don't know that's going to happen. So you have to anticipate that, and you have to bring on partners early who are not just looking at the park, but are looking at those other economic things, because you can have economic development and parks. It can be done. There's solutions for it, but people aren't willing to pay for it and invest in it. And now is the time to do both.
Absolutely. So I have another question. As far as like starting out, we have smaller groups of people like Friends of the Parks that may not have funding to get groups of people out. What's the best way to get beginners out there, out in nature, that maybe haven't been able to experience it before on a limited budget?
You could do bird walks. The Audubon Society will come out and host a bird walk. They'll do a virtual one these days because of the pandemic. But birds are a great introduction, because you can do that from your own, backyard. In urban settings, there's birds everywhere. So that's one way to do it. I think walking clubs. I've seen like Girl Trek and other groups they have a virtual platform. They have different challenges and ways that you can be involved, that you can do it during a pandemic, and you can do it when, things one day hopefully open back up and we can gather together. But you can, I think one thing that's important is to do things that are social, where you're not inviting people out to just go out on their own, but like the work that you do, where you invite people to come out together, whether it be with the social distancing or they know that there's going to be other people in the park at that time. I think that's so important to really make people feel welcome, whether it be a large park or community park. If they know every second Saturday families are going to be in that park, then people can anticipate it and begin to use that park in the way that you want to see it happen.
Yeah, I think that throws back to something that Daisy raised, which is representation. I think communities of color need facilitated programs. I think because of the experiences that we have, we want consistency and we want to go out there. And many times it means having somebody who's holding your hand. A lot of times the thing that makes you a nature enthusiast is somebody you trusted took you out into nature. A family member, an uncle, a grandfather, somebody you trusted connected you to nature. And we've got to be able to recognize that we need that in our communities. And that, again, is really what fosters stewardship. It's the trust, consistent behavior that you're going to do this, as Ayanna said, every monthly programming. It's going to be the same or relatively the same at the same time. They don't want to see this kind of popcorning in, and maybe I'm not going to do it this time, or maybe I'm not going to do it that time. And I think another thing that we need is just to be able to have the infrastructure in our park be up to par. Now that we have COVID, we know that these pandemics might come again, and our parks have to be able to absorb tens of thousands of people. And Cascade Springs has been off the chain. I mean, it's been wonderful to see the amount of people at Cascade Springs, but the parking lot, you can't even get any more cars in. So they can't social distance. And so how do we make sure that our parks are ready for the population that is getting ready to be able to absorb it? And I'll stop there.
Yeah, we have like 2 more minutes or 1 more minute for one last question, and let's just make this real quick. Let's say, like, as a person that has never advocated for something, what's the best way to advocate for the protection of land and trees and nature in Atlanta?
I think the best way to do it is to get people out into it. So if you know of a spot, invite your elected officials out, invite your community leaders out, invite the leaders of the church out, because when you help them have that experience, and that's going to have ripple effects, and they're going to tell other people. And don't just invite them when you have a problem. Invite them when the sun is shining and the birds are out, and you can take them out to experience what you want to see, as well as and demonstrate what is the problem. But I think you have to have that balance where people can see it and smell it and touch it and feel it. It's the best way to get people out in nature, because there's nothing like seeing it firsthand.
I completely agree. I'm going to go ahead and move on for today. That's the end of our program. I want to thank the audience for joining us today. This has been an exciting conversation. I'm glad all of you could be here with us. I also want to thank all of our panelists. You guys are doing amazing work. I really appreciate you guys educating us today. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. And guys that had asked park-related questions that weren't answered today, we will be sending out a follow-up email as well as a satisfaction survey. So there will be more information so you can follow up with those questions. And lastly, I just want to throw in that our next Nature for All Atlanta event is going to be July 2nd at 12 o'clock. It's also a virtual event. We're going to do a bilingual urban nature walk, and I would love if all of you can join us. Thank you so much.